This show is sponsored by HeadNote, helping law firms get paid 70% faster with their compliant e-payments and accounts receivables automation platform. Learn how to get paid quicker and more efficiently at headnote.com.
Welcome to this episode of the Modern Law Library. I'm Olivia Aguilar from ABA Publishing, and I'll be today's host. In this episode, I speak with Don Tortorice, the author of the 5th edition of the Modern Rules of Order. Don is a retired partner of the international law firm of Duane Morris, LLP, and most recently a law professor at the William & Mary School of Law. He served as a drafting member of the task force to revise Pennsylvania's corporation and business laws, and as a member of the boards of directors of a number of private business corporations and nonprofit organizations. Today, Don discusses how readers can use his book to establish a more efficient procedure for both major corporation and small nonprofit business meetings. Don, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here.
All right, so it's time to start thinking about New Year's resolutions, and a lot of people aim to be more productive and use their time more effectively, especially at work. So how can the modern rules of order help with that?
Well, I'll tell you what, let me reflect on how writing this little book began. I was chairman of the business section of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and we were having lunch after one of our meetings. And the topic of the meeting was to plan a session on conducting corporate meetings. And the outgoing chairman of the committee said, one of the major problems that I've always seen in meetings is getting the chairman to know Robert's Rules of Order. Because most of our corporations and assemblies and clubs and associations have just sort of adopted Robert's Rules of Order in a knee-jerk fashion. And very often, the chairman doesn't know it, and all too frequently, there will be someone who is somewhat disruptive who knows it a lot more than the chairman knows it and can use it as an element of uncomfortable disruption. And so I said, well, why don't you and I write a better set of rules of order for corporate and association meetings? And he said, well, no, I'm going to retire. You write it. So I spent the next year pondering and drafting the modern rules. And after about a year, came up with a finished product, which was something that I had hoped would be available to chairpersons of corporate and association meetings, something that could be read within 30 minutes and essentially mastered or being able to be used efficiently. Mm-hmm. And that was the product. What I have done with the modern rules is essentially to reflect the way most meetings are carried out, and that is that they are run by the chair of the meeting, and they are run in a manner that treats all of the topics of discussion, allows for full debate where there is debate, and provides for an efficient and equitable resolution of all questions on the agenda. Mm-hmm. And I think we've done it. After writing the modern rules, I went to the Pennsylvania Bar Association and its publication arm, and they agreed to publish it. And they sold, I think, a little less than 10,000 copies in the first year. And then I spoke with your colleagues at the American Bar Association, and for the past, I think 15 to 18 years, the ABA has also been publishing it, and it's been a great success. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been a great success because it has been usable. It is something that allows for simplification of procedure that still is very equitable and just moves us along without the opprobrium of having to master and abide by very complex and rather oligarchic rules in Robert's Rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very accessible book. And your author bio, you kind of discussed about how your experience inspired you to write this, but your author bio states, quote, he has chaired and sat through more business meetings than he cares to remember. Sitting through all of those meetings, did you feel like there was something missing in the structure that you that you wanted to touch upon?
As a lawyer, I felt it was necessary for me essentially to know Robert's rules. Now, because they are so complex, and let me pause here and recite the name of Robert's rules. It's Robert's Rules of Parliamentary Procedure. Focus on the word parliamentary. A business, an organization, a club does not need rules of parliament. The parliamentary rules, those used by governing bodies, utilize the rules not simply as rules for procedure in getting the work done, but also as political dynamics. And, filibusters, for example, are parts of parliamentary rules, but they should never be in rules of procedure for a corporation or an association or a club. Never. And Mr. Roberts himself indicated that his rules may not, and indeed, I think, are not appropriate for anything less than a parliamentary body. So, having worked through Robert's rules, I lived with them for a number of years because I knew them and I could get around them. But I had studied them, and I find that so many chairpersons just, don't take the time, and I understand why they wouldn't, because it takes an enormous effort to master Robert's rules. And what I've done in the modern rules is, well, let me tell you how many rules there are in my modern rules. There are 2 rules. and that sounds a little oversimplistic, and it's not really, and I'll explain why. But let me just read for you the very short rule number 1, and it is as follows. Authority for conduct of the meeting is assigned to the chair, who shall be responsible for the timely, fair, and reasonable conduct of the meeting's business. Decisions of the chair are final on questions of procedure, except that, and this is important, except that any ruling may be appeals to a vote of the meeting. If a rule of the chair is corrected by the meeting, the chair shall amend its ruling to reflect the will of the meeting. That's it. That's rule number 1. And the modern rules actually could be the modern rule of order, and it's that rule, because rule number 2 simply says that the effect of the rules shall be subordinate to the bylaws of the corporation, which are subordinate to the articles of the organization, which are subordinate to the state law, which under the Supremacy Clause is subject to federal law, which is subject to the U.S. Constitution. And that's the pyramid of authority with respect to operation of any corporation or any club or any association. And that's really not a rule unto itself. It's simply a recognition of that pyramid of authority. So we have one rule, and that is that the chair runs the meeting. But the chair cannot be an oligarch, because if the meeting disagrees with what he or she has done or has said, a motion can be raised to essentially change the rule of the chairman. And if the majority of the meeting overrules the chair, then that decision by the meeting is the resolution of the issue. So the democratic nature of the meeting is never given up, because whatever the chair does, it is subject to acceptance by the meeting. And that's something that really should never occur, because if the chairperson is making rulings that are not consonant with the sense of the meeting, then perhaps you need a new leadership. But if there is a ruling by the chair, it is subject to acceptance by a majority of those in the meeting. Now, when one gets the Modern Rules book, and it's really more of a pamphlet than a book, and if I look to see how many pages there are 54 pages in the book, and it's only about a quarter of an inch thick. And what I've done is to discuss a lot of things other than the rule that I've just read. And what I have done is put in, following the rule, a number of guidelines. And those guidelines really reflect the basis of a procedure that we're familiar with, that most of us are familiar with, and that's derived from most of the dynamics of Robert's rules. Motions to vacate, motions to table, motions to challenge a quorum of the meeting. Those sorts of things we are accustomed to in terms of running most meetings, and I discuss them, all of them essentially, and provide a chart on page 12 of the pamphlet that states whether general motions may interrupt a speaker, require a second, are debatable or not, are amendable or not, and what the vote is required for passage of such a motion. Now, once again, this is a guideline. It is not a rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I address things that we are generally accustomed to, such as points of privilege, points of procedure, motions to appeal, motion to postpone consideration, to amend, to limit, extend, or close debates, and that sort of thing. And these are things that are all, set out in brief conversational form that the chairperson, in reviewing the rules, and hopefully will be able to read them and know them enough to work with them within 20 or 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Great, yeah. And this is the 5th edition of the book now. Could you share some of the new information that you included? You discussed the one rule, but could you talk about what's new in this edition?
Actually, what I did, and this was in the 4th edition, which was about 4 years ago. I mean, all of the rules and guidelines were set forth as rules, and they were condensed and made readable. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. Rather than have, all of the subordinate guidelines stated as rules, let's describe them and make them consistent with what they actually are. And that is, pursuant to Rule 1, they are guidelines for the chair. They are not absolute rules.
So do you find that there is an increasing need for these more concise procedures, using time more effectively? Do you think that's changing with the times, or why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's essential that organizations move with respect to a set of rules like the modern rules, because any organization that utilizes Robert's rules is utilizing a handicap. Because, as I indicated, so frequent is a circumstance where the chairperson of a meeting doesn't know Robert's rules, hasn't taken the time to read through them, and it would take, hours and hours to get through in a meaningful way Robert's Rules of Order. Here, the chairperson should be able to read the modern rules and within 20 or 30 minutes know how to use them and feel confident. And I think it's something that has a very high utility quotient.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on, we're going to take a quick commercial break to hear from our sponsors.
Hey, law firms. Getting paid is fantastic, but dealing with accounts receivable is such a pain. What if there was a better way? Enter HeadNote, an industry-leading compliant e-payments and AR automation system. Their unique blend of features cuts through the noise and helps you to get paid 70% faster. Skip the paper checks, spreadsheets, and awkward calls to overdue clients. Get paid faster with less effort. Visit headnote.com for more information.
Welcome back to the Modern Law Library. We're speaking with Donald Tortorice, author of The Modern Rules of Order. So to get back into it, to kind of go through the introduction of the book, you state that state laws and corporate bylaws are generally silent regarding the procedural conduct of meetings, and there's really no detailed rules for business meetings that are commonly accepted. Why do you think that is?
I really can't say that I know why that is. My speculation is that state legislatures have been reluctant to put any stamp of approval on any particular set of rules of order. And so the cases that have arisen with respect to what law applies to conduct of meetings have generally been resolved in how the officers who are running the meetings, how they have conducted them in a generic democratic fashion. There is no case that I know of, and I think no case at all, which says, well, because you required a second to a motion to adjourn, that is not acceptable because the law is silent as to whether motions require a second or not. Although Robert's rule says very definitely that a motion to adjourn does not require a second. And I've wondered, why is that so? And I really can't tell you, because the motion is made, it is not seconded, and it goes to a vote of the meeting. And it seems to me that any motion that doesn't have a second is something that isn't worth considering and should be passed on. Because if you don't have a second, you're not going to have more than one vote for that particular motion. And I think one of the things that after I wrote the modern rules, they were not adopted by the legislature in the new business corporation law, or business associations law, actually, because they didn't want to sanction a specific book. The committee, however, that rewrote the business associations law said that they recommended the usage of the modern rules of order. And let me say, also at this point, I think it's appropriate to say that what I get out of this book in terms of royalties, and you can probably confirm this, is royalties that over the course of a year will probably buy a good dinner on Saturday night, and that's about the scope of it. So I don't have a whole lot of financial money in the game. I just think the rules are good on their own, and I recommend them as such.
So do you find that a lot of businesses and corporations are transitioning to using these modern rules of order from your experience?
Yes. The last time I did a count, a little over 200,000 copies have been sold by the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the American Bar Association. And that's since I wrote them originally. And I know, let's see, that a number of universities have gone to them. A number of Fortune 500 corporations have gone to them. And just scores of smaller corporations and associations and clubs have gone to them. And there's no reason why anyone, any club, any organization shouldn't be able to use them, because what it does is provide for an efficient conduct of meetings, an equitable conduct of meetings, and it gives the chair an ability to essentially mold and conduct meetings in the way he or she thinks is most efficient. And all chairs, wants to get to the business at hand, want to resolve it in a way that everybody accepts it, and wants to move on.
Yeah, definitely. And as you've stated, these rules provide a more modern procedure. Do you think that these rules will just continue to change with the demands of business meetings?
There isn't a whole lot of change that can occur, because this has been distilled into the simplest and most straightforward methodology that I have been able to fashion and then adjust over the years. And I think they're just about in their final shape, because what they do in actuality is reflect the methodology for conducting a business the way effective chairs have done it all along. And one thing that I point out is that very often a chair will, instead of taking a vote, will say it is the sense of the meeting that the motion is carried. And if anyone objects to that, they can call for a vote. And if there is a call for a vote, then the chair probably should take a vote on it. But otherwise, usually everybody's talked it out, and they've come to a final answer, and the chair can say the sense of the meeting is that umpty-dumpty-dump. If there is any kind of controversy, however, a vote should be taken and recorded. And that's the way effective chairs have always done their meetings.
So since the chair has, most of the authority in the meeting, do you have any advice for chairs on how to be more effective and, use their time wisely in these meetings?
Yes. And an effective meeting is run in what manner? In a manner that is efficient and fair, gets to the business, takes care of the business, and then concludes as soon as it effectively can. There are very few things in the corporate and association world that are more bothersome and troublesome than long meetings that just go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And effective chairs will be able to use the modern rules to have discussion on perhaps a divided issue where the answer isn't manifest. And we'll have discussion that will be fully vetted and then call for a vote, a resolution, when all of the sides of the proposition have been considered. We'll call for a vote, and then we'll resolve the issue and move on to the next.
So the book is obviously a very accessible, compact handbook, and I think that readers would find a lot of value in reading your tips throughout it. What do you hope that readers take away from your book?
Confidence. My objective, my purpose, was to write a set of rules that chairs could read, learn in a short period of time, and utilize in going forward to conduct meetings in an efficient and equitable fashion. I also have, toward the end of the rules, formats for minutes, because I have found and have experienced when a secretary of a corporation or a club is elected, they will ask, "Oh my, what are minutes like?" Well, I set forth formats for minutes that generally will show what the minutes should contain, and then I give actual specimens of minutes for board meetings and for annual meetings, so that they've got something to look at and know what their minutes should look like.
Yeah, and the book also includes typical meeting agendas, which are really helpful too, just how to stay on track with the meeting, and both are great resources toward the end of the book.
I also point out in the rules that if a chairperson is, has stage fright, for example, and in a significant corporation or association that might very well be, there are provisions whereby the chair can appoint an acting officer to either chair the meeting or keep the minutes or do anything in place of the officially elected person, so long as the action of the acting individual is subject to ultimate control of the elected person.
Great. Thank you. So where can our listeners reach you if they're interested in learning more about your work?
If there are any questions about any of the issues, I can be reached probably most easily by email. And my email address is dontort@aol.com. And I would be happy to entertain any question and provide a timely response.
All right. Well, great. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, Don.
Well, you're very welcome. It has been a pleasure.
You can purchase The Modern Rules of Order at the ABA web store. Go to americanbar.org/products. That's americanbar.org/products. If you enjoyed this episode of the Modern Law Library, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast listening service.